We had a meeting at the governor's house on February 27th, and we were talking about COVID as it was starting to emerge and what were their plans. And the thing that's interesting about that, a week later, I went to a party where a bunch of us that are retired from the sheriff's department, we go to Burt's every first Friday in March for the last 20 years. And that is the place where I think a lot of us, got sick. Donna Faye Collins passed away. And so when I take steps back and look at how did this happen and how it was treated, I think about some of my friends that tried to go to the hospital that are Black that were told to go home. We think about the Detroit captain that went to the hospital and they told him, "Oh, you're okay." How many other people were sent home because of this bias, if you will? Didn't check them out, didn't do anything. The other thing that I'm working on is we had to jump hurdles to get people tested. So when we talk about initially, my wife and I, we both got tested. She was negative, I was positive. It took us a week to get the results back. So now I know that they've got, better technology so you can get information, quicker. But if we're talking about a week span and I'm still going to work and doing the things that I've been doing, how many other people have exposed to this? So we've learned a lot about this. And I'll say this, I stand behind the governor 100%. Because she shut the state down, I want to say on the 13th, because nobody went to work on the 16th. And I'll never forget it. I was downtown and there's a pub down there that has this huge St. Patty's Day party. They had tents right there across from Fishbones. And that's usually a big deal. Had people been allowed to go and still, just mix with one another, we don't know how many lives would have been touched. But the biggest thing that I'm working on right now is what's next. You get your test, like I got my test, it was positive. You self-quarantine, it's the then what? What are we talking about aftercare? Because as we start to notice that people are coming out of aftercare, like I know I lost 15 pounds and a lot of it was muscle. I'm not as strong as I used to be, but I know some people, a good friend of mine who was at that party, just got out of the hospital Monday. He went last Friday and he said that he had blood clots on his lungs and he has a bone infection. And that is due to COVID. Okay, now that we've survived, because we've got more people that have survived that have passed away, we've got to look at these healthcare disparities, healthcare access, because if you were having issues about getting healthcare before and you received, your positive result and they told you quarantine, what's next for some of these people? And I know because I have insurance, I can call and say, my doctor's appointment is in August 10th, to give you an idea of how far out we're talking. We have to look at this and learn lessons from accessibility. And like Reverend Simmons said, the disparities. I live in a zip code that has the highest asthma. We're one of the more polluted zip codes in the state of Michigan. So we're talking about being predisposed to issues that already affect your lungs. So I'm looking at this holistically. Now, the problem lies with this, and we're going to be honest on this call. A lot of my Republican colleagues don't believe that it exists the way it does, even though Isaac Robinson, my seatmate, passed away from it. We were in education yesterday, and if you look at the Detroit News article, my Republican colleagues still refuse to wear masks. So wearing masks, number one, is disrespectful, and then you can't turn around and say you're pro-life and not wear a mask to protect life. So there's some issues there. So as a coalition, as a caucus, we're working on legislation to try to change some of these disparities and get healthcare access to communities. The other thing that was large and huge, E-Course in River Rouge, there was no testing done down there at all. So we were able to secure some opportunities with Midwest Health. What is Midwest? I don't want to butcher their name because they're testing people every week. They're going to Coney Islands. They are going to dollar stores. They are meeting the people where they are because people don't have access to internet. People don't have access to transportation. So those are the things that we're working on right now because a lot of people don't have money, and we remove the barriers about healthcare insurance. You got to have healthcare. You got to have prescriptions. So as the Detroit caucus worked on those things, including out at the state fair. If you remember, first it was drive-through, everybody didn't have a car. Then you had to have a primary care physician. So we've removed as many barriers as possible. Now we've got to figure out the what's next, because this is impacting people differently. You know, if you watch the news, you'll see where I was watching Como the other night. They had a lady on there. She said her lungs don't have the capacity. Her children, 17, had it. They had a gentleman on there one night that said his memory is not as good as it used to be. So after this is over, we've got to figure out, how do we care for some of the people who didn't have health care before? And now this is going to magnify and accelerate any conditions that they have. So those are the things that we're working on. It's the aftercare. But I've got to get buy-in from my Republican colleagues. So
thinking about the discrepancies we've seen between political parties, but also different populations, one of the concerns I've had is despite how widespread COVID is, it seems to be a fair population who not only has not had it, but don't know anybody who has, or anyone who has died. And so they don't seem to believe that it is that big a deal. So I ran into somebody, it was somebody that did some work on my house, and he said, I live right near the fairgrounds. I don't see that line being very big. And I had to explain to him that a lot of people in Detroit don't have cars, and that was a limitation. But how do we reach out to those people who truly don't think it's a big thing because they really haven't seen it affect them or anyone around them?
Well, there's a lot of misinformation going around about, you know, how you get it. And then there's an arrogance of some people. They're still having beach parties. They're still having gatherings. And it's going to take somebody close to them to get it, for them to get it. Because just watching this, I had it. I know 8 people that are in my cell phone that have passed away. Right. So I know the impact. I know that it's real. I still have some of my, and I'll just be honest, my Republican colleagues that just do not believe. And it reminds me of the crack epidemic and the opioid crisis. When it was crack and it was in the Black community, it was like, okay, just say no. Then when it became an opioid issue and it hit suburban areas and different pockets, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, we got to get rehab. We can't send these people to prison. So the different responses are based on their beliefs and their choices. And when they have the power to make decisions, I don't pray that anybody gets it before they get it. But if that's what it's going to take, then, you know, we'll have to hold our breath. Because the simple thing about not wearing a mask yesterday in a educational hearing, when we're talking about kids going back to school, there's a picture, like I said, my Republican colleagues, only one Republican had a mask on.
What can we do now in Detroit and Michigan to mitigate the virus and address the underlying economic and social determinants of health?
Well, the first thing I say to people is responsible people have to hold our irresponsible relatives and friends accountable, because all they do is create more rules for us. And I'll give you an example. You've got a 23-year-old son that thinks he can go and do whatever he wants to do. And if he doesn't leave the house with a mask, he can't get back in the house. It's that simple. So we're responsible. And all they're going to do, irresponsible people, and we see them all the time, just, you know, gently persuade them to, hey, wear a mask. You know, it'll save lives. It'll protect us. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the government can't do it. The police can't do it. We who are here every day have to talk to people that we know, love, and they trust us and say, hey, just wear a mask. That's all we're asking.
Okay. What are your thoughts or recommendations for the upcoming school year?
Personally, I'm a no right now. I'm a no, because I look at it this way, and we worked on criminal justice reform. One of my House bills was to let people who are frail and sick come home. So you notice they've been releasing prisoners. My request, when you release a prisoner, is that you test him or her and make sure that they're negative, because you may be sending them to a home that has 4 generations. They may have a great grandmother, a grandmother. So we're talking about people who may be susceptible to this. And we're talking about kids. Kids go to school and kids are strong, and if they've got everything going, but you got to remember the lunch lady, the janitor, the bus person. It's more than just kids and teachers. We've got to look at this on a whole spectrum and say, how do we best protect folks? And if we see another spike, then I'm a no. I mean, we've got to figure out a hybrid way. If 2 days a week people go, depending on where we are in the levels. But right now, we don't have a vaccine. We don't have anything in place to protect us. And we're talking about the whole state. But I have Ecorse River Rouge in Southwest Detroit, and they barely have enough money for the minimums. So if we're talking about sending kids and putting them at risk, then we're talking about a whole community. So I'm a no.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.